let's get into it now. I guess let's talk about Jonathan Smith. Michigan State hiring away Jonathan Smith from Oregon State, an Oregon State alum, an Oregon State former quarterback, a guy who had consistently said that he was very happy there. And I think fans, players, and some of the coaching staff that stayed with Trent Bray feels a little misled in some ways. But in terms of an actual hire for Michigan State, you're looking at a guy that has developed an Oregon State program, which has not historically been really good outside of Mike Riley as a coach there. And he did a very, very good job there. The problem is, I think, the expectations at Michigan State are very high. So we'll see what he meets there. In terms of the staff that he's brought in, it's basically just might as well call them the Michigan State Beavers. Let me go through the list of coaches that he is hiring from Oregon State that was with him there. The defensive line coach, the offensive line coach, the offensive coordinator, the tight ends coach, the defensive backs coach, the running backs coach, the director of player personnel, and Steve of staff. Wait, what? I said SAC staff. Some kind of staff coordinator or director of staff, whatever it is. So that's a lot. That's quite a bit. But he had a formula that worked at Oregon State. So does it work here is the question. Now, Mike Riley, in his scenario, when he went to Nebraska, it did not work out. So a little bit of, is this potentially Mike Riley 2.0?
I don't quite think so. I do think Jonathan Smith had a little bit more success than Mike Riley, a little bit more prolonged success. In an era where I think it was honestly harder to win at Oregon State with Jonathan Smith there than it was when Mike Riley was there. I don't blame him for leaving at all. Like this is, if you want to get mad at anybody, get mad at the Pac-12 commissioner. I mean, this is a guy that has to take care of his family. This is a guy it's a business first and foremost, and loyalty matters. I get that, but people leave jobs all the time, and obviously it sucks that you're going to burn some bridges there. But it sounds like he's still bringing over a good amount of players with him and coaches. So everyone understands the situation there. Yeah, it's a tough situation. Obviously, we've been huge supporters of Oregon State and Jonathan Smith, and obviously Washington State as well, Jake Dickert, all year because it's a very unfortunate situation there. But I think he's going to thrive here. I think he's really going to thrive here. I think the expectation here is a little bit more manageable, and I think if he does what he did at Oregon State and Michigan State, which has much more resources, but obviously it's a more competitive conference, especially now with the addition to the Pac-12 schools. I think he can do it. I think he can. I think it's shown that as soon as people are entering the portal, Michigan State's a pretty good spot to go because they believe in Jonathan Smith. He had great staff at Oregon State. A lot of them coming over here. You're probably bringing over Aiden Childs as well. That's awesome. That's a great start for Jonathan Smith there in a program that just 2 years ago was, 10-2, lighting the Big Ten in the college football playoff on fire. And then obviously, 3 years ago, and then Mel Tucker obviously crash and burn there with everything that went on. But yeah, it's, I think there's some talent here. I do think he needs better coaching, right? You don't just, with Mel Tucker, he was just a recruiter. He was a really good recruiter. He utilized the transfer portal very well. He's a good mind for sure, but his big thing was bringing in talent, and they'll figure out the rest. And I think Jonathan Smith's going to go about it a little bit differently. I hope they give him the patience there that they gave him at Oregon State. It took him a while to get his culture in there, to build a program, to recruit consistently, to have depth and experience everywhere across the board, and to become a legit Pac-12 contender. I mean, people forget in November, they were in the middle of a playoff race, a Pac-12 race in a really competitive conference. And their only losses were to Arizona, who's one of the hotter teams in the country right now, and then Oregon, who's obviously one of the top 10 teams in the country as well. So yeah, it's just I think he's going to do well here.
Yeah, the biggest hire that I think you brought over, and Oregon State fans, Michigan State fans, correct me on this pronunciation. I literally couldn't find it anywhere. But Jim Michalczyk or Michalczyk, however you pronounce that, the offensive line coach at Oregon State, obviously road graders that he's developed over there. And you're going to have more talent in Michigan State because of it. But what's interesting, though, is after this hire, it's so interesting to me to see a bunch of Michigan State offensive linemen jump in the portal. I mean, you have so first and foremost, Caden Hauser goes in the portal, which I don't think is a huge loss given his performance this year. I know he was the big 4-star recruit, the guy, the hero. But look, Aiden Childs is better if he ends up coming this direction. You could see maybe Will Howard coming this direction. There's a ton of quarterbacks in the portal that could potentially come this way. So uh, let me see this. Gino Vandemark. Oh, they're starting right guard. I mean, I kind of he's been hurt the latter half of the season, but Spencer Brown, Blackstock. I think I don't know. I was really confused when I saw the list of transfers for Michigan State, seeing a bunch of them being offensive linemen, given what Jonathan Smith's staff has done with offensive linemen these last couple of years. So found that very
I think
interesting.
it could have been a little bit of both. To be honest, like mutual sides. I think that this O line was pretty bad for a couple of years now, and Kenneth Walker kind of, made it look good for that 1 year, but it really wasn't that good. And I don't think many of them believe that, Smith, or that I don't think Smith believes in many of them to like continue to be there. The problem is it's hard to rebuild an offensive line in a transfer portal, right? Especially in 1 year. So we'll see what he can do there.
Yeah, and other notable names in the transfer portal: Zion Young, their edge rusher, 6'6", 260, sophomore. Uh, he had an okay year this year, but I think Michigan State fans are pretty bummed about that if he ends up actually still leaving officially. Only because like he's put on like 40 pounds since he stepped on campus. I think his ceiling has just not been even close to being hit yet. So I think that was definitely a bummer for a lot of these guys. But yeah, and then oh Henry, who's a wide receiver, is gonna potentially go to Minnesota. Anyways, forget his name. I don't know that Michigan State fans are
Oh,
super upset
Tyrell
about that.
Henry.
Tyrell Henry. So I'm a I believe in Jonathan Smith for sure. I do worry that Michigan State expectations are higher potentially than they should be. Like I don't think Michigan State, at least in the next couple of years for sure, they cannot compete for a Big Ten title. They can't do it.
In the next how many years?
Next couple, I'd say next 3 or 4 at least. Like
Yes.
I just all like the upper echelon teams in the Big Ten. Now, in the Big Ten, can you win 8 to 9 games? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Michigan
And
State fans could look in 3 or 4 years if Jonathan Smith is continually winning 8 to 9 games. I think that's good.
I think the more important part about that is sure, you might not win the Big Ten, but in a 12-team expanded playoffs, you go 9-3, 10-2, you're going to be right up there, right? In that 9 to 15 range to be able to compete for a spot in the 12-team playoff, which I think is more the ceiling that Michigan State's at right now, not in terms of winning the Big Ten, because you still have, in my count, 4 to 5 programs recruiting at a better rate than you right now. That can all change, obviously, in 4 to 5 years. Sure, after you stack classes on classes on classes, but like you mentioned, they're pretty pretty far away from that. But I think the better goal here in the next 2 to 3 years is to be competing, in the top 20 level nationally.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of expectations and all that's going on and the way Jonathan Smith has performed, because again, we talk about expectations. Can't give a grade without giving expectations, right? What are given that B is, given that like an A is basically meeting, A is probably exceeding expectations, B is meeting expectations.
Yeah.
C is not meeting expectations. What do you grade this higher on a letter grade scale?
I think it's an A. I think he is going to exceed expectations and my expectations, our expectations here on the show, Michigan State. Is he going to, like the boosters and the greedy donors, is he going to meet those expectations? I don't know. We'll see. It might take him a couple years. I hope they give him that grace period to do that. he reminds me of a guy like Matt Rule and a guy that like it takes him a couple years to build his program up to a spot like that. And there's a reason this job was open was because it was a mess. It was a mess this year. They were probably one of the top three worst Power Five schools this year in football. Like this was an awful team. There's some talent there for sure. You got a guy like Nick Marsh. You got to keep him on staff. They're bringing him in for an official visit this weekend. You can plug some holes with some transfers from Oregon State, with some flip some commits there that you had committed there. Like a guy like Rustin Young and some other guys as well. They're trying to flip Brady Pretzloff from Minnesota, in-state kid who's been a late riser in 24/7. But it's going to take some time. You're going to come back next year, and we're going to probably do our
second year coaches draft.
And it's going to be like he's going to be like 6-6 or 5-7, and everyone's going to be like, oh no, he can't do it. No, give him time. I beg you. He's a good coach. He knows what he's doing. It will take him time, but yeah, I'm going to give this an A because I think this was a slam dunk hire for Michigan State. Just with his track record and what they needed in that program in a culture shift.
Yeah, I give it an A as well, because if the expectation for me is 8-4, 9-3, maybe knocking at the door of the playoffs, I think he can exceed that. I'm not saying he could win the Big Ten. Maybe he could. I don't know, in like a crazy year, maybe he could. But I think like winning 10 games is not out of the possibility for Jonathan Smith. He way exceeded expectations at Oregon State. I think he's a very good coach. This past year had some game management situations where maybe, people didn't agree with it. But I think overall, if you're asking me if 8-4, 9-3 is the expectation, can Jonathan Smith exceed it? I think he can. Absolutely. Willie is another question. So, good luck to Jonathan Smith. Good luck to Michigan State fans. Michigan State's gotten a lot of hate from me because I was not on the Mel Tucker, train. And then, of course, it crashed and burned. Didn't mean to rub it in your faces, guys. But look, this is in the long term, this is going to be better for the program. It is going to be better for the program. Jonathan Smith is a better coach than Mel Tucker.